Have you ever felt an unexplainable connection to ancient Egypt? It was the biggest and most prosperous civilization of its time, and there's just something about the culture, the monuments, and the thousands of years of dynasties that fascinates us all. But some people feel something even deeper. In fact, I noticed a bizarre pattern where a disproportionate number of people have claimed they had a past life in Egypt specifically, or a very strong connection to the culture. Yeah, I'm talking about reincarnation. With the overwhelming number of claims and amazing memories, and even some people knowing things about the past long before historians ever knew them, I had to ask, why do so many people feel a connection to ancient Egypt? If reincarnation is real, could we once have been a part of that civilization during our soul's long journeys to get where we are today? Let's dive into the overwhelming evidence, and you'll see how it all led me to some cosmic conclusions that go beyond modern history, into a metaphysical past that may just be the key to discovering more about ourselves today. Join me, Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. In 1904, a 3-year-old girl fell down a flight of stairs and died. The body was put in a bedroom while the doctor prepared a death certificate. When he came back in, though, the child was miraculously sitting on the bed, fully unharmed. They asked her why she was crying, and the child said, "I want to go home." They assured her that she was home, but from then on, a string of strange events involving memories of ancient Egypt surrounded the child that only grew through the rest of her life. Dorothy Eadie's Egyptian reincarnation story is probably the most famous account there is. After the accident, Dorothy visited the British Museum with her family, and they were shocked as she ran around the room, kissing the statue's feet and exclaiming with relief, "These are my people." When she first saw a magazine photo of the temple at Abydos, she told her parents, "Here is my home. But why is it in ruins, and where are the gardens?" She even got kicked out of her school and church for saying things like Christianity reminded her of the old religion in Egypt. So just think for a minute how bizarre it would be for a child in the early 1900s to have all these things happening to her and longings deep in her soul for another place, based on memories that nobody believes are real. It's no wonder that Dorothy later moved to the place where she'd felt for so many years was her true home, and it finally brought her relief. But maybe you're thinking, how do we know she wasn't just obsessed? She studied ancient Egypt a lot and became an expert, right? Well, that part is true, but it doesn't explain the things she couldn't have known about through study. For one, Dorothy was challenged by the chief inspector of Egypt's Antiquities Department to go to Seti I's temple in total darkness and describe a series of wall paintings. Get this, the locations of the pieces had never been published before, but Dorothy was able to describe each one and walk right to them in the dark without error. The inspector was astonished. So why did Dorothy specifically know Seti's temple so well? Because in ancient times, she'd become a priestess at that very temple after her vegetable seller mother died and her soldier father was too poor to take care of her. Now, as a side note, I can't tell you how many people have publicly claimed that they were Queen Cleopatra in a past life. It seriously has to be about 40 people at this point. I mean, people have even come up to me at conferences and said that. So, no, I don't think all of them were actually Cleopatra or even someone famous. But when Dorothy claimed she was once a priestess, she wasn't claiming to be a famous sorcerer or something. She was basically a lowly nun under the temple priests. Dorothy remembered the pharaoh Seti being a very kind man and them having an affair. When she became pregnant with this child, this was a pretty big deal. The priest told her she could get the death penalty if she was brought to trial. So she ended up taking her own life to prevent a public scandal. But how do we know she was really there? Remember that Dorothy could describe the temple wall paintings in the dark that weren't even published yet. Then she said that every temple had a hall of records, and there was a book repository attached to the temple in Luxor containing all important documents from the time of the ancestors. In ancient Egypt, that included records that had survived through the major political conflicts over time. Although no such room was known in the early 1900s, Dorothy said this place would be found under a modern building in her time. Just wait. Now, if you've ever looked into the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, he did thousands of past life readings where an enormous amount of people remembered having lives in ancient Egypt. He also said that there was a hall of records and that it was located under the Sphinx, where information from even a more ancient civilization like Atlantis was actually preserved. So Dorothy and Casey's information match each other. But if that's too out there for you, this is the kicker. It wasn't until 2021 when a void was indeed found underneath the Sphinx. There are also tunnels under the area, which the Egyptian Antiquities Department has confirmed. But Dorothy knew these things long before modern discoveries. The most amazing confirmation of all was her knowledge of ancient gardens and sites near the Temple of Seti I. Only 2 days after Dorothy arrived in the area, the local inspector of antiquities mentioned they'd been finding hints of other pharaonic sites, like a monument built at Abydos in the 12th dynasty. Dorothy told him, "Oh, I know where that is." He didn't believe her because she'd only just arrived, so she led him and a man with a shovel to a spot, said, "Dig here," and they got about 2 feet below ground when they hit the top of a mud brick wall. It was built in wavy lines characteristic of the 12th century, just like they'd been looking for. Now, here are my questions. Why wouldn't Dorothy Eady have made up a more impressive past life for herself, or said she was Cleopatra if she were making all of this up? Why would she say she only had glimpses of this past life as opposed to remembering everything clearly? And how can it be explained in general that a 3-year-old girl has a major accident and then suddenly knows information about the distant past that Egyptologists don't even know? Archaeologists admired her throughout her entire life, which doesn't make sense if she were just a crazy person or a hoaxer. The take home from Dorothy's story for me wasn't as much that reincarnation could be possible as that her experience and remembered knowledge seemed to heal something inside herself. First, literally right after the accident when she woke up remembering this past, her body was miraculously fine. Then for the next 24 years until she got married and moved to Egypt, the more she understood about her people's past, the more connected she felt. When she got to Egypt, and then finally moved back to Abydos, she grew more and more carefree with each step. Dorothy used her memories to help others make amazing discoveries and even understand their shared human past. Knowing more about herself helped her to be happier and more fulfilled than anything else too. So that's a pretty good case for looking into past life stuff more if it can have these potential benefits. I thought Dorothy Eady's story was probably the strongest case for ancient lives in Egypt, but then I wondered if this were an isolated case. Well, no, absolutely not. In fact, this is a bigger pattern that has deeper implications than I realized, so let's talk about those next. In past cultures, people would look for family birthmarks when a baby was born. It's said that royalty did this to determine that the child was a rightful heir. I personally know people with family birthmarks, and I found one family whose birthmarks go back 9 generations. What's interesting is that past life researchers have found that some people who had trauma in a past life, like a gunshot, spear wound, or head trauma that killed them, were born with birthmarks in those exact spots in modern times. Just take the 3-year-old Drew's boy who had a long red birthmark on his head. He claimed he was murdered with an axe. He even told his family what village he was from and the name of his killer. When he was brought to the village, the 3-year-old took the elders to the very spot where his body was buried, and a skeleton was found with a wound to the head exactly the same as the birthmark he now carried. When the axe was found as well, the killer had to admit to his crime. That's incredible, and it's an interesting coincidence that the child was Druze, a faith that had originated in Egypt and believes in reincarnation. But I'm not saying your birthmark is going to disappear or your wounds will heal if you find out about your past life. I'm saying that maybe the reason why birthmarks or other physical effects appear at all is because that trauma is still locked inside somewhere, even if you're not aware of it. What if many illnesses are rooted in something like a trapped emotion? And if we release it, there can be healing, at least on an emotional level. A past life regression specialist named Janet Masucci did an interview with The Advocate in 1988. In her experience, people have an innate wisdom, and our higher self, or true self deep inside, can show us information that will heal us on some level. In fact, after conducting tons of past life regression sessions where people were brought back to past life events in their minds, Janet found a pattern of people passing on memories genetically. Maybe that's why some families carry birthmarks as well. They have shared trauma, shared karma, or even shared blessings. What I liked about this interview wasn't that Janet was a self-proclaimed regressionist who could reveal someone's past. She said that the information people remember doesn't even have to necessarily be real, but can be symbolic, like in a dream. Something inside you knows what you need to experience, to remember, and to know about at that moment. So how does this relate to health in our bodies? Well, she gave a bunch of examples. One regression client had starved herself to death in a past lifetime after she lost her husband, who went to war and didn't return. Life wasn't worthwhile for her without him. Now, in this lifetime, she found she had a bad relationship with her husband and that she was dangerously overweight to the point where she was eating herself to death. From knowing about her past life, the woman was able to realize that she didn't know how to get out of a relationship without dying. Then Janet helped her remember another lifetime in which she had a good, balanced relationship, and the woman realized there were other ways to live. The old emotions and trauma were just stuck there, preventing her from growing. Another client remembered a past life when they had to move to an uncomfortable location and wear restrictive clothing, which they endured out of loyalty to their father. In this lifetime, the person was still restricting themselves, but in an unhealthy way. Realizing what behaviors they had mistakenly tied to loyalty that weren't even rational helped the person realize what they could let go of in this life. You know, I agree that these memories don't need to be 100% accurate if they help you improve. So if you think you were somebody particular in the past, great. The weird part I keep coming back to is that there are so many accounts of past lives in Egypt. I mean, why? Janet said that a lot of people remember lives as ancient Egyptians, citizens of Atlantis, and Native Americans. She said it's amazing how similar these past lives can be, and that sometimes 3 out of 10 people in her classes have a past life memory of Egypt. She's sure she hasn't said anything to lead them to that conclusion either, so these people are just telling her on their own. Janet wondered if maybe there was a metaphysical reason here, that they were unconsciously attracted to this class to share those memories together. But her own personal belief is that a lot of people who remembered certain past lives are remembering information and traditions that are particularly valid right now, and that a lot of true culture has been forgotten. I'll come back to that point soon because it had some pretty ancient roots. But if you're still not convinced, let's go over some of the most interesting memories of ancient times found, and then we'll see where it all ends. A child named Anna remembered a past life when an earthquake collapsed town roofs and the land was buried in sand. She could even draw a map of the area and write some of the language. Her memories and drawings lined up with the ancient Egyptian civilization on Heraklion, which was discovered underwater in 2000 because the port city had indeed experienced an earthquake that buried it. When Anna was 3 years old and her bunny passed away, she seemed to have an overly traumatic response, saying, "I'm leaving my body. I'm okay. I'm okay. You're going to be okay." So maybe some trauma about death was stuck inside, and when Anna was older and could understand her past death in Egypt, it was easier to move on with her current life and deal with death now. Making friends with other children who remembered past lives helped her too. Then there's the woman who said she was alive during the reign of King Tutankhamun. You know, the alien-headed boy king who died mysteriously when he was just 19. This woman remembered being in a large arena watching King Tut demonstrate his chariot skills to the crowd. She watched as he had an accident and died from his injuries. The woman told her kids in this life that the pharaohs would often appear in public and that they were revered like celebrities. People would travel from all over to see them in their grandeur. Well, her daughter was skeptical of these memories, especially because in the 70s and 80s, when her mom was talking about this, the going theory about Tut's premature death was that he was killed by a blow to the back of the head from a murderous priest. But the mother would just sit there with her arms defiantly folded with a smile on her face and say, "No, I was there. He died in a chariot accident." Years went by, and finally a TV documentary about Egypt talked about how King Tut was known to be an excellent chariot driver. Then they discussed a new CT scan done on his mummy that revealed a leg injury looking very much consistent with a chariot crash. The injury itself wasn't life-threatening, but because it was so close to his death, it's possible that it caused an infection and killed him. Okay, whatever really killed King Tut, it looks like the mother's memory was accurate, that he was in a crash, then died soon after. Funny enough, when Dorothy Eady talked about him, she always thought of King Tut as that horrid little boy, and that she detested his memory and the memory of his father, Akhenaten. That's because a little before Pharaoh Seti's time, when Dorothy remembered living, Akhenaten had tried to destroy the old religion in Egypt. So it's like what Janet Masucci said, that past traditions and culture have been forgotten, or in this case, deliberately changed over time. But what happens when we remember those long-buried histories? Another woman reported that her daughter used to dream about the Egyptian pyramids. When she was 8 years old, she was able to describe the inside of the pharaoh's tombs in great detail. She would talk about the relationship between the members of the royal family and their subjects, including many secret discussions between female royals and their ladies' maids, and the battles between the women for the pharaoh's affections. But can anyone corroborate what it was like to be a woman during the time of the pharaohs? Well, yes. You've probably heard of John D. Rockefeller, the Standard Oil businessman, and one of the wealthiest Americans of all time. Well, his daughter, Edith Rockefeller McCormick, astonished everyone at a dinner party in 1923 by claiming that she was King Tut's first wife. Tut's tomb had been uncovered not long before, and the press was publishing photos of the objects inside. As soon as Edith saw a chair recovered from the king's chamber, like a flash, she recognized the chair because she'd sat in it many times. What's interesting is that she remembered dying just 2 years into their marriage and said that the bit of hair that was found in the tomb when it was dug up wasn't hers, but the king's next wife after her. If Edith had been looking for attention, she did get it with the press repeating her story later. But if she'd been looking to make herself look good with the attention, why would she pick someone with such a short footnote in history with no interesting accomplishments? Spiritualism was really hip at the time among some elite circles, but why risk harming her current father's reputation and money with these woo-woo stories? Finally, there's the 1923 account of the London professor who recalled 6 of his previous lives, including one married to an Egyptian princess and another as a Viking. I care about this one mostly because of his sister-in-law, though. She realized that she was able to write in ancient Chinese, not 1920s Chinese, but an ancient and lost dialect. It was so lost to history that she couldn't read it herself and had to have the British Museum read it for her. That's weird. The newspaper that reported this story had an interesting point. It is curious that the memory recalls so accurately a past life in Egypt or China, but does not recall the language, which at one time must have been a daily habit. After all, the sins of one life are bad enough to recall, let alone the sins of half a dozen or more previous existences. Yeah, imagine remembering all the past times you hurt people, times you loved someone and lost them, or things you cared about so deeply, but you can't have in this life because hundreds or thousands of years have gone by. It would be hard to live in the present with all of that past accessible to your mind, or if you knew how many amazing accomplishments you had, it'd probably affect you too. Some people argue, why doesn't everyone remember past lives if they're real? Well, I think we can't remember it all and still be functioning humans. But if it's going to help us in some way to remember some pieces of a life or even multiple ones, then maybe that's why some people do. Many people feel an unexplainable longing for home, just like Dorothy Eady did when she woke up unharmed after falling down the stairs. On some levels, maybe that longing goes away a bit when we find a loved location we used to live in or rediscover a loved person we used to know in another life. But if we look at the bigger picture here, we need to really ask why so many people are connected to significant places like Egypt in particular. The Egyptians had an advanced knowledge of the cosmos, and certainly whoever built the Egyptian pyramids did. The math of the pyramids matches up perfectly with the dimensions of the Earth, as I explained in another episode. You gotta check that one out. At its peak, everything about the ancient Egyptian culture involved worshiping the divine and looking to the skies. So what if this connection to Egypt and mysterious longing for home that we feel are hints that not only do we come from somewhere significant, like a great culture and history, but also maybe we come from even more miraculous cosmic places that we haven't really begun to remember, and Egypt is just the beginning. If you've ever had a past life memory or felt a strange connection to a place you can't explain, I want to hear about it in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel so that you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. If you want to support my work and get access to bonus content, you can subscribe to the Metaphysical.tv, where I have more than 1,000 videos on mysteries, ancient civilizations, and more. Here's a big shout out to all our current subscribers because we couldn't keep making this content without you. If you'd like to get yourself a bag of Metaphysical coffee, visit the links in the description as well. And thanks so much for watching. And with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.